I want to thank the Certain Foundation for their support, not just of Brookings' work and generous support of our Metropolitan Infrastructure Initiative, but the long-term support of the Certain Foundation for the transportation reform movement over the last number of years. You and your colleagues have been a strong and indispensable intellectual partner on all this stuff. So thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. Since the beginning of our republic, transportation has played a vital and central role in the American economy. Whether it was the canals in upstate New York or the interstates that ultimately connected all regions of this country, or the railroads that linked our heartland and our industrial centers, in each of these periods, there was a sharp focus on prioritized, strategic, and rational infrastructure investments. But while the United States once understood this, we definitely seem to have forgotten, as we've talked about numerous times today. Today, our federal transportation program is adrift. It's geared more to building bridges to nowhere than maintaining the ones that we have, developing world-class transit, or unblocking the movement of our freight at our sea, rail, and our airports. Now, this would be an untenable situation under normal circumstances, but it has new meaning today. From ever-increasing gas prices to the twin issues of energy security and climate change, from persistent metropolitan bottlenecks and congestion to the explosion of freight and truck traffic across the country, the physical neglect and the congestion in the system has a price tag conservatively estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Clearly, this country needs a very, very frank and very clear conversation about transportation. So my talk today makes the following proposition. First, given the new spatial geography that we've talked about numerous times today, the nation's transportation challenges are largely metropolitan transportation challenges. Second, after a period of drift, federal transportation policy is not just broke, it is broken. And third, now more than ever, federal transportation policy needs an extreme makeover. Now, there are those who would look at the situation today and recommend that we spend more to repair our deficient infrastructure, to address our gateways and corridors, and to make transit more the norm than the exception. But this cannot just be about spending. First and foremost, we need to reform, and then as Governor Rendell talked about today, we need to invest. So let's begin with my first proposition. As Bruce highlighted earlier, our metropolitan areas are agglomerations of innovation and human capital. Metros offer more sustainable development patterns, which are supported by a range of transportation choices. So while metropolitan areas make up just 12% of the land area, there where 72% of seaport tonnage arrives and departs, where 78% of our interstate miles are traveled, where 92% of our air passengers board and our transit miles are ridden, and where 93% of our rail passengers board. In short, our major metros concentrate the key transportation functions as they do on so many other national priorities. But the important role that metros play has come with some real costs, and they are where some of our country's most vexing transportation challenges are being played out. So let's take a look at the country's transportation assets and how, even given their extensiveness, the majority of our activities are funneled through just a few key places. Our metros are the heart of a new system of international and domestic trade, commerce, and travel. Our top 15 ports alone, like New York, New Jersey, Oakland, and Hampton Roads, move over 73% of the value of international freight. Similarly, our busiest airports that transfer freight are primarily concentrated in the largest metros. 66% of it moves through the top 15 airports like Louisville, Memphis, and Miami. But more than just freight, 340 million passengers also move through the 15 largest airports every year. So when including the top hubs for surface traffic from trucks, we see that the top gateways for both passengers and goods are highly concentrated in our nation's largest metropolitan areas. Now, connected to these nodes is an extensive rail network that moves over 2 billion tons of freight every year, most of which moves along these primary rail corridors that emanate out of our major metros. Our rail lines also move passengers between the major metros. The top Amtrak lines alone, the ones you see here lit up, carry 63% of all riders. Last but not least is our highway network. 3/4 of our nation's total freight value is moved on trucks, and half of the nation's total truck travel occurs in just the top 50 metro areas. So together, these key corridors connect those same top gateways for both passengers and freight. The punchline here is simple. The national economy runs through our major metros, the hubs of our country's economic enterprises, our cultural amenities, and our destinations for higher learning. Yet with this success, again, comes some serious, serious challenges. At the top of the list is always traffic congestion. The intense concentration of activity in trade and in moving people in and out of our key metros has generated high levels of congestion, impeding our ability to perform. So let's zoom in and focus closer on this challenge and how it's affecting the lives of people, our economy, and our environment. As we just saw, the top 15 ports transfer the vast majority of our goods both in and out of the country. Outside of these ports, places such as Seattle, Houston, Miami, and Los Angeles, neighborhoods and businesses are witnessing some of the largest increases in traffic congestion in the last 20 years. These volumes are hurting these communities and slowing our country's economic efficiency writ large. Related, the number of trucks on our roadways will effectively double by 2025. Between 2001 and 2006 alone, the number of trailer trucks has increased by 15%. Increased trade has also placed new demands on our railroads. From 1990 to 2003, rail freight traffic increased by more than 50% and is expected to double by 2035. Yet while demand for our railroads to move goods is increasing, the amount of track used by the major railroads has been decreasing, along with equipment and the size of the workforce. As a result, we have only about half as much Class I freight rail as we did in 1975. The increased traffic also burdens our passenger rail network too. Of the 22,000-mile Amtrak network, Amtrak owns only these 750 miles, primarily between Boston and Washington. The rest of the system it must share with the increasing demands on private freight operators. And with decreases in air passenger service, thousands of travelers are forced to wait every day as on-time performance for air dropped from 81% in just 2002 to only 70% today. These challenges have profound implications for our economy, our environment, and our communities. From an economic standpoint, these bottlenecks in congested areas do come with a price. An assessment of the cost to just shipping inventories alone is about $7 billion each year. Environmentally, the level of pollution coming from our congested trade gateways and corridors is alarming. Despite the fact that trucks make up only 7% of all vehicular travel, a recent Brookings study found that they are responsible for a quarter of the carbon emitted in just the top 100 metros. There's also an important social equity component to many urban residents. The amount of air pollution blowing inland every day from the ports of LA and Long Beach is astoundingly equal to the amount generated daily by 3 million cars. But all of this is still only part of the story. Our transportation network is also the way we move within metros. In fact, every day, about 80% of the nation's total travel occurs in metropolitan areas. The latest data shows that we drove 2 trillion miles in urban areas in 2006. That's an increase of over 400 billion miles in just 10 years. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Part is our changing metropolitan landscape. Today, most metropolitan jobs are located 10 miles outside of downtown. So half of all work commutes are suburb to suburb. Only 14% are the traditional suburb to center city route where there is established transit service. Part of it is also the changing nature of the American economy, particularly increased overseas manufacturing and just-in-time delivery operations. More and more cargo is being shipped over shorter distances. In fact, 2/3 of all truck tonnage travels less than 100 miles. So what has been the result? For one thing, the number of hours we sit in traffic has grown to 38 hours per year for each metropolitan area traveler, up from just 14 in 1982. And for the nation's top metro areas, the figure is 54 hours a year. But here's something interesting. After years and years of steady increases, the total amount of driving in the U.S. has slowed down dramatically. And from March 2007 to March 2008, total driving fell by 11 billion miles, the largest drop that this nation has ever seen. Now, without a doubt, some of this decrease is attributable to the skyrocketing gas prices because we know that most people can stop traveling, but some can change how they travel. As a result, transit ridership is booming, increasing by 85 million trips over the last year, mostly in response to high gas prices. But we also know that these transit riders are heavily concentrated in just the major metropolitan areas. The reality is that the availability and accessibility of quality public transportation across the country's 100 largest metros is seriously, seriously lacking. Almost all of our buses serve the top 100 metros, but half are concentrated in just these 10 largest places. Heavy rail, also referred to as subways, exists in only 11 metros like Philadelphia, San Francisco. Commuter rail is in only 14 metros, primarily in the Northeast and in California. And light rail can be found in only 26 places like Minneapolis, San Diego, and Buffalo. So shown here are the places where relatively high bus or rail capacity exists. And therefore, based simply on the amount of transit infrastructure available, 54 of the 100 largest metros do not have any rail transit service and also have relatively weak bus systems. This includes large metros like Orlando and Indianapolis, fast-growing places like Raleigh and Jacksonville, and slow-growing metros like Youngstown, Ohio, and Rochester, New York. The lack of metropolitan travel options means that tens of millions of Americans are tethered to their cars for their daily needs. That is, assuming that they can afford the high cost of owning a car. The implications are undoubtedly clear, but they are not equally felt. As employment has dispersed through metro areas, lower-income workers are finding themselves increasingly isolated and therefore need to spend higher proportions of their income to reach their jobs. Many simply have no choice but to spend $4 for a gallon of gas. The working poor spend 6.1% of their income on commuting, compared to 3.8% for other workers. And those that use their own car spend the most at 8.4%. And this doesn't even reflect the recent spike in gas prices. But the problem for transportation costs is not just a problem for low-income families. Household spending on transportation has risen across the board, and it is now the second largest expense for most American households, eating up 19 cents out of every dollar. In other words, we spend about as much on transportation in a year as we do on food and health care combined. Economically, the time that we lose sitting in traffic, plus the fuel that we waste, is costing our country dearly. About $78 billion each year, and this is a disproportionate problem for the nation's largest places. Just the three largest metros, New York, LA, and Chicago, account for a quarter of the total congestion cost. In addition, the average driver in metropolitan America wastes 26 gallons of fuel each year due to congestion. If we add this up, that's 2.9 billion gallons each year, the equivalent to about 1/5 of the oil imported annually from the Persian Gulf. But the problem is not just wasting fuel, which is bad enough on its own. Environmentally, transportation is the single largest contributor to the nation's carbon footprint, and even the relatively small increase in driving that many seem willing to accept will still spew out more and more carbon, wiping out the benefits gained from more fuel-efficient cars and from the expansion of cleaner fuel alternatives. In sum, there is a complex and at times conflicting set of transportation challenges in this country, both between and within metropolitan areas. This now takes me to my second point. At the precise time when this nation desperately needs to prioritize its limited investments and resources, the federal transportation program has lost focus. Our response has been mostly to keep throwing money at the problem, without any meaningful attempt at policy reform. Federal transportation funds are distributed like peanut butter across the continent without any real purpose, targeting, or accountability. There are several problems. First, for the vast majority of the program, the federal government is absent when it should be present, lacking any overarching national vision, goals, leadership, or direction. So unlike our competitor nations who have both national freight policy and national passenger rail policy and do not expect their major ports and hubs to go it alone, the U.S. government is absent by failing to focus on these areas of national priority. Next, our federal transportation policies are outdated and still not attuned to the needs, problems, and challenges of metropolitan areas. For one, federal transportation policy continues to assign states the primary role in transportation decision-making. Metro still only receives 6% of the federal highway allocations directly. Second, federal transportation dollars continue to be distributed to its grantees based on archaic funding and equity formulas. There is no reward for reducing the demand for driving, nor for overall spending. In fact, at the same time Americans are seeking to drive less due to energy and climate concerns, the federal formulas reward consumption that Mayor Nichols talked about today and penalize conservation. Third, the federal highway and transit programs continue to operate on an unlevel playing field. While projects that use highway dollars are subject to only perfunctory review and enjoy a federal funding contribution of 80 or 90% of the total project cost, transit projects are subject to an intense, hyper-competitive bureaucratic process and a federal contribution of less than half the cost of the project. The result is that while this nation built enough rail to stretch from Alaska's Bridge to Nowhere to the London Underground in the last 20 years, We also managed to construct 132,000 miles of roadways, enough to circle this globe 5 times. Lastly, the lack of a 21st century approach to government means that the federal transportation program is underperforming and failing to maximize efficiencies. There is almost no focus in the federal program today on outcomes or performance. So at this moment of transportation crisis, billions and billions of federal transportation dollars are distributed without any kind of meaningful direction or connection to advancing national interest. Earmarks and special interest giveaways have replaced and trumped any unified national purpose. Here you can see the thousands of earmarks identified in the current federal law. And while it may appear that there is some concentration due primarily to congressional districts, only about half of the total funding from these earmarks goes to the 100 largest metro areas. Equally disturbing is a pervasive lack of fact-gathering and analysis across the transportation program. Federal agencies do not collect or analyze sufficient information about the system, and its grantees conduct little or no performance assessment on the results of the hundreds and hundreds of billions of spending. We just can't manage what we can't measure. So, taken together, our country's transportation program gives a blank check and hopes for the best. The problem now is that there's no more money left in the bank account. In just a few short months, the withdrawals from the Federal Transportation Trust Fund will be greater than the balance that's left in it. In other words, those checks are all going to start bouncing. This is not hard to understand. Really, the federal gas tax, which generates 2/3 of the federal transportation revenue, has not been raised in nearly 20 years, even to keep pace with inflation. And as Americans are driving less in response to already high gas prices, we're all paying less into the account as well. But this critique is much deeper than not having enough money. As we've tried to illustrate, not just do we have a system that is broke, we have a system that is broken. So my final point is that federal policy needs an extreme makeover. If our transportation program is going to achieve critical national objectives in an era of fiscal constraints, it's going to need to focus and it's going to need to prioritize. The nation should settle for nothing less than evidence-based, value-driven decision-making. And to echo a common theme that Sharon already mentioned that was articulated by the National Transportation Policy Study and Revenue Commission, as well as many, many others in Washington and across the country, we need a new beginning. So what we are proposing is a 3-pronged strategy for our national transportation program. First, the federal government should lead in those areas where there are clear demands for national uniformity or else to match the scale and the geographic reach of certain problems. We must define, design, and embrace a new unified vision for transportation policy. The focus should be on investing in infrastructure that supports the competitiveness and environmental sustainability of the nation rather than on funding individual states or spending on singular needs. In this regard, Congress should authorize a permanent independent body, a Strategic Transportation Investments Commission, to prioritize federal investments and carry out that national vision. It would address nationally significant questions such as, where are our most critical bottlenecks on the national interstate system? What kind of investments should be made in our national gateways? And which corridors need attention for a true national rail network? Second, while there are clearly areas of national scope where the federal government should lead, there are other areas where it should get out of the way and empower metropolitan areas and local governments and states to innovate. In this regard, the largest metropolitan areas should be given much greater funding and project selection responsibility. Metropolitan entities need real authority and real resources in order to bring local officials to the table in order to make real decisions. But beyond money, metros need a broad strategy of modality neutrality that establishes equal treatment between the highway, transit, and non-motorized projects. This is a lesson we've learned from the UK that empowers decision makers to evaluate all projects on their ability to deliver cost-effective benefits by the best means available, not through the rules or the funding silos that are assigned to a particular mode. We also need to embrace market mechanisms and establish national policies for road pricing. There is ample evidence all across the globe to show that these strategies can effectively address congestion and maximize the use of scarce roadway space, especially in dense metro areas like London, Stockholm, and Singapore. We need to remove the tolling restrictions on the interstates and develop meaningful guidance to assist metropolitan entities in engaging in public-private partnerships as a way to insert market discipline and private financing into the system. Lastly, the federal government needs to assist states and metropolitan areas in developing truly integrated transportation, land use, and economic development plans to serve the projected growth over the next several decades. Sustainability challenge contracts should be awarded competitively to entice states and metropolitan areas to devise their own visions for the future. The third strategy is for the federal government to maximize not just its own workings, but that of its grantees as well, in order to maximize metropolitan prosperity. In order to rebuild the public trust, we have to fix what is broken and tie the federal program to a tangible set of outcomes and performance measures, and we need to hold the grantees accountable for meeting these goals. The federal government should replicate the intricate web of data, metrics, analytical tools, and spatial planning techniques now routinely deployed in places like Germany, Britain, Denmark, and other European nations, so we can make decisions based on fact rather than on political horse trading and measure our progress toward clear national priorities. We need to get more strategic, we need to get more disciplined. Building it smart can also mean building it small. Yet in order to commit to such an evidence-based program, we need to build a world-class data and information system, call it Transstat, and make it transparent and make it accessible. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What about the money? Well, we definitely need a frank conversation about transportation finance, but it must be about investing rather than spending. So after these reform measures are put in place, all options for financing should be on the table. To lead in the funding of projects of national significance, the federal government should act as a guarantor of debt and create a national infrastructure corporation that would sell bonds to private investors. To empower states and metropolitan areas, the federal gas tax should be raised, yet the nation should not be tethered long-term to the fuel tax for transportation revenues. So the federal government should also provide stronger incentives for the adoption of market mechanisms like congestion pricing to maximize metropolitan road networks, as well as the expansion of a range of ideas for user fees. However, these ideas should not preclude a comprehensive and inclusive discussion about transportation, a discussion that includes accountability, overall intent, and connection to broader goals and of economic growth and personal mobility. We can do this. We have done this. There were times that our nation had a national transportation vision to guide our future. Under President Eisenhower in the 1950s came the construction of the interstates. It helped build out our nation and also connect it within. For Senator Pat Moynihan and his colleagues in the 1980s and 1990s, the vision was to modernize the program and connect the modes, road, transit, rail, and others. The challenge for us today is to recognize, as Sharon said, that transportation is a means to an end and not the end in and of itself. By focusing on these three policy reform areas, federal leadership, empowerment of metro areas, and optimization of the program, we can craft a new vision for transportation that guarantees a strong economy, a clean environment, and a secure quality of life for all segments of society, now and for future generations. But we also need to summon up the courage to make that vision a reality. Thank you very much.